And you wouldn't like that, would ya? Ha ha!
Cool. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you to the season finale of the Foxhounds Kennel podcast. And I have with me today an extremely special guest, somebody I'm really, really excited to talk to. He is the Sensei, Sifu, Grandmaster, Godfather, because he likes all those terms so much, of Libre Fighting, Mr. Scott Babb.
I've threatened to throw people out of seminars for calling me master.
I know. Well, I read the book, sir. I read the book. So we're definitely we're on the fucking internet. And yeah, so we're here today. I'm super pumped to have you on, man. I've had practitioners of all different arts, modern, traditional, whatever. But you are the first person who I feel, with the exception of Crafty Dog in the stick fighting world, you're the first person that I feel who has really taken, and begun to create a modern martial art. And I know you sort of more refer to it as combatives over traditional martial arts, but as in my view, martial art is martial art. So why don't you just first kind of give people a little intro on yourself, if you're somebody who's listening who doesn't know who Scott is, who's never heard of the Libre Fighting system, but we'll go from there.
I'm the founder of Libre Fighting. Libre is a knife-based discipline that's geared towards the way knife violence occurs in the Western world. Came up in Filipino martial arts. I still love Filipino martial arts. I'm still very passionate about Filipino martial arts. But what I found with my training was that the blade work I'd learned specifically was geared around the larger, heavier agricultural knife. And a lot of it didn't translate well to the way knife violence unfolds in the Western world. So we sort of started taking and back engineering how knife violence actually happens, looking at knife assaults, then working backwards from there and developing counter tactics for that. And then putting that into an aggressive framework. We were very fortunate in that early on, we started working with Ed Calderon of Ed's Manifesto, and he took what we were doing down to the teams he was working with in Mexico. So they could take the lessons we were teaching, and because they were going up against the cartels in a very violent situation, they would go out into the field and actually apply the skills we were teaching them, then bring feedback to us, and then we could refine what we were doing based on that. So at the same time, we also were having people, as Libre was starting to grow, we were having people fly in from all over the country and all over the world to train with us. So we were in this very fortunate position where we were getting influence from a lot of very talented martial artists from all over the world, then being able to take what we were doing, refine it, and send it down to Mexico where it could be tested out in the field, and then learn from that and sort of adapt and refine the system as we went. So it became a very functional, became a system that was being tested in real time, which was just a very fortunate geographic advantage we had, in that I was in San Diego, Mexico's just across the border. Since then, it's spread all over the world. We have chapters in somewhere between 80 and 100. We have somewhere between 80 and 100 chapters in between 20 and 30 countries. I need to do a new, need to go back and get an actual count. It's been a while since I've done it, but we've trained the special forces and intelligence units in the Philippines, special forces in Indonesia, celebrity bodyguard teams. We've worked with members of SWAT, members of U.S. Special Forces. We've trained the teams to go up against the cartels down in Mexico. So it's been a very interesting ride. I'll put it that way. This is definitely nothing I never expected to see. But the Libre mindset it's built around not countering with a knife. It's not waiting for someone to attack you and then working around that attack.
Yeah, there's no defanging the snake.
No, and I want to be clear that defanging the snake is a concept that, in the context in which it was developed, makes a lot of sense. In the Philippines, where it's a tropical environment where people are going to have bare arms, and they were using big, heavy blades. Yeah, if you lash out at someone's arm, you're going to wreck that arm. But if you take a small pocket knife and put it in a place like say Chicago in the winter where someone's wearing a winter jacket and try and use that same motion in that situation, you're just going to ruin the guy's jacket, or he might need some stitches at most, but it's not going to be the same kind of debilitating attack. And that's one of the things that we really focus on in Libre, is studying the endemics of an area and then gearing what we do towards that, because knives are used differently in different parts of the world. So if you're preparing for knife violence, you have to be aware of how knife violence unfolds where you are and adapt your training to that. I don't think there's a one size fits all solution to surviving a knife attack. But what we did learn through a lot of pressure testing was, if you're trying to defend against a knife, if someone's attacking you and you're trying to sort of block and counter or defang the snake or do anything of that sort, you end up in a defensive position and usually will get overrun very quickly. Obviously, if you're using a knife in a life and death situation, you damn well better be justified in using lethal force, whether you're intending to actually use lethal force or just, debilitate someone with a knife. But to me, if someone has a knife or a baseball bat or some kind of weapon, and they're within range of striking me and they're expressing lethal intent, waiting for that person to start stabbing me would be like waiting for someone with a gun to start shooting. It just, from a tactical perspective, it doesn't make sense. And it just, in that situation, I think that you are, and I want to be clear, I'm not a lawyer, not legal advice. I always tell people they're responsible for their own legal education. But if someone is 2 feet in front of me with a knife, screaming they're going to murder me with, frothing at the mouth, yeah, I'm going to want to take control of that situation and put them in the defensive position so I can be the one that survives. And I think that's where Libre sort of differs from a lot of other knife methodologies.
Of course. Yeah, one of the things that I sort of differentiate between a traditional martial art and a modern martial art is that modern martial arts are not as concerned with like honor so much as like maybe surviving the encounter. One of the right now in jiu-jitsu, there's this whole big respect is being lost and all this stuff, and people like Gordon Ryan have brought up like, hey, how did the Gracies make Brazilian jiu-jitsu famous? They went around and dojo stormed people. They pressure tested things in a situation that wasn't two guys walk out, bow, all respectful, and play within the same rule set. I find that Libre Fighting doesn't seem to give a shit about your rule set. So
exactly.
We're not gonna even have time to get into your rule set. We just want this to be done. From my own training with the now defunct, because we all moved away, Boston Libre chapter, while we were in there for a minute, the difference between what I teach even in my stick fighting group, which is geared much more towards, I call it stick combat, because we're going all ranges, grappling on the ground, whatever. There's still this very ritualized atmosphere that we're working in. And when we were training Libre, Jess and Ben and myself, we were training in Ben's old Boston brownstone that had caught fire and was being rebuilt. So like we were in a fire damaged room, just the three of us going at it and, doing, the Libre style drills. And it didn't feel like the same thing as everybody, we meet in the park, we all high five, and we, afterwards, sometimes we go have a beer or whatever after, but for the most part, it just, whether it was the actual training atmosphere or not, like it takes you to a much more primal place. It's not, as concerned with the niceties of everything, which that actually brings one of the things that I find interesting in Libre is that you guys go for the eyes to start many combinations. And it's one of the things that I've picked up personally, as if I'm in a self-defense situation, the first thing I'm going to do is stab the motherfucker right in the eye. But I know you came to that through the real.
That was actually some of the feedback we got from the guys in Mexico is, and every seminar I've done, almost every, I'd say 95% of the seminars I've done, I've opened by asking if anyone there's ever been stabbed in a street altercation. And there's usually one or two.
Mhm.
Then I would ask, did you know you were stabbed during the altercation when it happened? And almost 100% of the time, the answer was no. And when they did realize they'd been stabbed, it's not because, it was debilitating pain. It was that they actually saw the knife or saw the blood. But usually they'll just say, yeah, I thought I took a really hard punch. And then when the fight was over, someone said, you're bleeding. I lifted up my shirt. I saw that I had a couple holes in me. Same thing with, I've had people who were slashed in the arm in street fights. And I said, did you lose motor function in that arm? They said, no, not at all. And they're like, even when it was healing, I could still write with that hand. And that's not to say that a slash of the arm can't render that arm useless, but it's not a guarantee. So when we started working with the guys in Mexico, one of the things that we learned was, even though it's a less lethal injury, hitting someone in the eye or even just anywhere in the region of the eye will quickly drop them to the ground and to take the fight out of them, or at least put them in a position where they're being defensive.
Mhm.
And that's not really something, the eye attacks had always been part of Libre, but I didn't start stressing them to that extent till we actually started getting that feedback in Mexico and realizing, like, this is actually how you can end an altercation quickly. And one of the things I get a lot of shit for is people say I should be teaching non-lethal knife tactics. And to me, that is a very functional non-lethal knife tactic, especially if you're not
Mhm.
doing a stab. If you're slashing
Mhm.
across the eye, yeah, you will do catastrophic damage to that eye. They might be blind on that side. They're going to be horribly scarred, but
Mhm.
you didn't take a life. And that could be
Right.
enough to end the altercations. If you're, 120-pound woman and, a 230-pound guy, throws you into a wall and starts beating on you, and you take out a knife or a pen and you slash his eye and he goes running off. It's like, you don't have to live with the psychological ramifications of having to have taken a human life, let alone the
Mhm.
civil or criminal liability of it.
Mhm.
But you've ended the altercation. It's just a different way to do that than other people do. And people tell me, you should teach people defang the snake, how to slash the arms, or how to disarm the knife. And it's like, well, what our research has shown is this is the fastest way to end an altercation.
Mhm.
And if the person does keep pressing the attack from there, now they have a blind side that you can move to and press the attack from there. It's going to take a lot of the fight out of them. So if you do have to press the attack after you take an eye, you're already in a much more tactically advantageous position.
Mhm.
But the flip side of that is it is gruesome. It's unpleasant to think about. It's unpleasant to talk about. And this is one of the things I have to reiterate a lot when I'm teaching is I'll say things like this in a very matter-of-fact way. And I have to let people know, like, I'm not trying to minimize this. Just understand that this is what I do for a living.
Right.
The stuff that I'm saying, I've said hundreds or thousands of times before. So it kind of comes out maybe a bit more naturally than it should. And I don't want to minimize it. It's just something that I say a lot. And it's like, I am fully aware of how horrible and gruesome it sounds to tell someone to stab another human being in the eye. It's a terrible thing that nobody should ever want to do. But if you're fighting for your life, it's a very sound tactic that's been proven to work. And I feel it would be immoral for me to teach something that I didn't feel someone could trust their life to. If I've trained someone in blade work and they're in an altercation where they have to use a knife to fight for their life, and what I teach them fails, I don't want to have to live with that. I want to make people as functional as possible because they're
Mhm.
trusting their life to me, especially when we're working with military and law enforcement security personnel.
Mhm.
Um, if I'm not giving them the very best, most functional stuff that I'm capable of giving them, I'm doing them a disservice and it could get them killed.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's why I tend to always tend to err on the side of functionality versus being socially palatable.
Come on, sticking somebody in the eye is totally socially palatable. If you've ever worked in retail, it's right in the front of your mind most of the time. Well, it's also, you kind of alluded to, within Libre, even though I kind of said it as stab them it's not just stab them in the eye. You have a variety of eye strikes and ways to kind of go in there. And that, that does speak to like, you know, you're not necessarily, obviously anytime a knife is out, someone is probably going to be horribly maimed at the, you know, at the best case scenario. But you know, it's not just like psychopathic, it is very gross muscle. It's one of the things that I like about it, the gross motor movement kind of stuff. But yeah, it's not just some sort of like a murder stroke scenario. It was one of the things that I really I came back to martial arts as an adult after experiencing a stabbing in front of me. One of my coworkers shanked one of my other coworkers. He actually did wall work and then attacked the femoral artery, which I didn't know what that was at the time. It was probably 2006 or 2007.
Do you have some prison experience? Or?
Well, he was from Mexico City. There were two guys. I was working at a sushi bar, and the two guys were guys that worked on the sushi line. One guy was from Indonesia, and the other guy was Mexican. He just looked Asian enough that they put him in the front of the sushi bar. Anybody that's ever worked at a sushi bar knows that's a real thing. They'll find some dude who's like, you could pass, put you up front. But if I go apply for a job, even if I've got experience, they're like, sorry, dude. But Alan's, my friend from Indonesia, is a shit talker. And he had been talking shit to this guy for weeks about something. And the dude just had enough on a Monday night. And they were passing through this area. The sushi bar obviously is in the restaurant, so it has the similar lighting. But the kitchen itself was much brighter. So they had these two curtains and this kind of like little short corridor of darkness. And the guy waited for him in the corridor. And when Alan came from the kitchen, you know, you're light blind for a second before you get into the more dimly lit part. And yeah, the dude just pushed his forearm across his shoulder and stuck a sushi knife right in the inside of his thigh. Held him to the wall for a second, walked away, drops the knife. This is super gangster. Dropped the knife in the soapy water and walked out the back door.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like it's the first time he's ever stabbed someone.
For sure, no. I walked in the room with my manager a couple of seconds after that. The service bar girl jumped. You could tell she had been around violence before too. She was from Nicaragua. She jumped through the window like she had a rocket up her ass. This tiny little girl who I had never seen in the front of the restaurant at all. I'd only ever seen her in the kitchen, right through the window. And then the blood across the floor was like a wave. It was real narrow. The kitchen was like ran the length of the building. And so we walked in and Alan was still standing. He was leaning against the wall like this. And I don't really remember the exact course of events. I know most of the people in the kitchen were going like this. They all froze and we're just going, ah. And the manager, who was like a 40-year-old woman, grabs me and goes, help him. So I tackled him onto the ground. I took one of the bus boys and a couple of the other cooks came over and we shoved a bunch of tablecloth in the gigantic hole. It was a, you know, a Santoku kind of knife. Started shoving stuff in the hole. The manager called the ambulance right away, and we hadn't processed like what had happened. So she had said it was an accident in the kitchen. And so they just sent an ambulance. So there were no cops at first. That dude was long gone. We were freaking out. Alan's alive, but he did die at the moment. Full on death rattle. You know, he got all white as a sheet. And the ambulance came and the EMTs came and they cut his pants off. And myself and this poor busboy who's like, he's just babbling in Spanish. He doesn't know what the fuck's going on. He's just got his eyes closed. And I just was like super hyper focused on just like, I had remembered from previous first aid training, like you don't, when a bandage or something is soaked through, like you don't take it off, you put another one on. So I was just focused on keeping my hands there. And the EMTs came and they cut his pants off and they did end up taking the bandages away. And then all of a sudden his heart pumped a couple more times, which it was crazy because you could see all through the layers of fat and muscle down to even the chip in his bone. And then like the bottom part of his artery was still together. And then all of a sudden it's just, and they got him, they got him out of there. They woke him back up at the hospital. It was like 25 liters of blood because they were just passing blood through him. They had to open his leg up bigger, clean it all up, put the artery back together. And then, bring him around, but I only kind of giggle because like he's alive. I saw him
Yeah.
not long ago, you know.
And that attack, as you describe it, is kind of the quintessential attack that I sort of use to describe how knife violence would typically unfold in the Western world, which would be confined space. It was a hallway,
Yes.
low light.
Yes.
That the knife wasn't brandished ahead of time. He didn't come out waving the knife. He got in
Correct.
close. And those are, you know, the way, that's how knife violence unfolds. People tend to have this misconception that someone's going to pull a knife and then you're going to pull your knife and you're going to circle around each other like it's, you know, West Side Story and sort of take swipes at each other and then move in and trap and disarm. And that's not how knife violence unfolds in the Western world. It unfolds exactly as you described, the confined space, usually low light. If the person has lethal intent, they're not going to display the knife ahead of time. They're going to get in close and surprise you with it, which means you have to have good situational awareness, strong soft skills. You need to be able to produce the knife and have it in your hand concealed in case the situation does escalate, which are all skills that I cover with guys. And a lot of that came from being able to work with Lee Morrison of Urban Combatives when we did some joint seminars together. And when I saw the way that he would build the whole scenario around it, not just isolating, here's the fighting aspect of it, here's the pre-attack cues, here's how the situation escalates, here are your opportunities to de-escalate the situation, to remove yourself, here's how to control the space, how to make sure that there's nobody behind you and stuff like that. I was able to sort of take those kind of ideas and put it in the context of blade work, which would mean, you know, knowing how to sense there's a problem, how to draw the knife and have it in your hand concealed so you're not being hostile with it, but being able to have it in your hand so you can lash out very quickly if you do see the attacker has a blade on him and is expressing lethal intent, which kind of makes it a more it goes beyond just the mechanics of knife fighting, which is what I really started with, was here's how to survive the physicality of a knife assault. And what it's evolved to is like, here's how to recognize an assault, someone preparing to assault you. Here's how to have your knife ready to go. And, you know, you see a lot more in our videos on social media now that we're doing a lot of scenario-based training where we'll kit someone up and give them a baseball bat or give them a knife and have them yelling and screaming and coming at one of my guys. And then my guys will have to, you know, fight their way out of that situation. And all of that came from the idea from trying to really build trying to discover how to survive a knife assault in all of its facets, you know, how to see the attack coming, how to understand the tactics that you use between an attacker with a baseball bat and a knife are totally different, multiple attackers, how to know if you have multiple attackers, which one to move towards first, how to position them, how to stack opponents, how to be able to fight your way to an escape position so you can leave the situation, which a lot of times will mean actually having to get past the opponent to get to a door and exit, things like that. That at least in my knife training coming up, none of that was really explored to in depth. You know, we would work knife against stick or knife against double stick. That aspect we did, but understanding like how to get the knife out, how to preempt an attack, how to read an opponent's body language and mannerisms and stuff and see if they are actually intending to attack you, knowing how to position yourself before an attack so that you can be towards an exit or control the space at least. That's all stuff that we've tried to build into the training now, because the actual physical skills of fighting aren't the total picture when it comes to surviving a knife assault. It's actually a very small part of it. It's an important part, it's an essential part, but there's so much more to it that needs to be explored. And I'm glad to see that it's not just us doing this anymore, that lots of people who do knife work are starting to branch out and explore this sort of thing. I try to never think that we have any claim to any aspect of knife combatives or knife fighting, for lack of a better term. You know, all that kind of political territoriality stuff. I don't think it does anyone any good.
No, it never really does. Well, when I, shortly after that experience, I found your early videos on YouTube, some like Hollywood Undead and just some dudes in black hoodies stabbing the shit out of each other. And I think I talked shit to you actually first.
Wouldn't be the first.
Well, I'm aware. but then it clicked with me what this is what I saw. You know what I mean? Like, this is much more realistic than not. And actually, I think, is it Finding Libre, where you quote a bunch of people, who had seen your stuff? One of your first two books, whether it was Finding Libre or
Probably Finding Libre.
yeah, I'm quoted in there. XEKXKOX is my screen name from when I was a teenager and in my early 20s. And I said something like, "This gives me a hard on." Oh, it wasn't, we weren't quoting fucking Robert Frost here. It was real basic. And I was like, yeah, because there was a moment where I realized like what I was starting to look at. And I feel like a lot of the knife arts, to a degree, some of it in Filipino martial arts, like you were saying, it was based on bigger blades. Even the difference between something like a K-bar or a camping knife versus the pocket knife that most of us carry needs to be used in a different way. Like it should go without saying, I'm sorry, that they're not going to be used the same way. So if we go to Filipino martial arts class and we're practicing our 1s and 2s and our defanging the snakes and our guntings and these things, our hubad, our knife tapping, those are good skills to have, but that it's not going to fit within the framework of how this is going to play out most likely in the world that we live in. And in my discovery of Libre fighting as even being a thing, and kind of on the outside, and then going through the first level of the old distance learning program. Now you guys have the guild, but getting in and seeing what the methodologies were, what the idea behind it was, hearing guys like Ed in the early videos talking about these experiences, and then training it on my own, I started to see like, okay, that other stuff isn't even preparing you in the least. In the sphere of dog brother martial arts, they have their empty hand versus knife is called DLO, which stands for die less often,
which is a perfect name.
Yeah, that is really not optimistic. Yeah. And the more we trained it, we brought Ed out actually in, I think it was 2017, to our winter camp. Actually, it was because it was when those pink hats with the ears showed up. I was in LA during that. We were all in LA during that period of time for that camp. And, we trained it exhaustively for a few days against guys who were, fairly rugged motherfuckers, when everyone in the room is a full dog brother or working their way up there. And you're like, all right, you guys are just going to spend 2 days stabbing each other. It gets rough, and it was a good experience, but we weren't doing anything sophisticated. There was nothing sophisticated. It was prison sewing machine, a lot of push and poke or grab and stab kind of stuff, over and under kind of stuff. And then Ed showed up and showed us a bunch of witchcraft. He also got to play with some pain tolerances of some guys who thought, like, we all think we're pretty tough. And he was like, oh yeah, he's grabbing people by the mouth and
stuff,
garroting people and carrying them around like a backpack. It was a fun one.
When we first started developing the garrote stuff, we were a little crazy with it because we really had to okay, how fast can you put someone under with this? Which meant,
somebody's got to
have to volunteer, and it's not long. It's a couple seconds. We learned we had to put handkerchiefs on our neck because we kept getting rope burns on our neck.
There's some kind of weird autoerotic asphyxiation club.
Yeah. It's not something you want to have to explain.
Yeah.
And you mentioned some of our older videos that like the ones with Hollywood Undead and the hoodies and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's weird because I go back from that and I could sort of see why people were put off by it. And the thing is, like, my mindset back then wasn't like, I want to make something that looks, hardcore and sort of, you know, ruthless. Really, it was like I used Hollywood Undead because back then everyone was using either Welcome to the Jungle for their knife videos, or when the bodies hit the floor. I like, to the point that it became a cliche, and it's like, I don't want to use the same music everyone else is using. I kind of came across this lesser known band called Hollywood Undead, and I was a really big fan of their music, and I was like, you know what, I want to expose more people to this music, and it's kind of different and stuff, so I'm going to put that in there. And then, like, you know, as far as what we were wearing, it was like, that's just what we wore to class. It's not like we said, you know, let's dress up in costumes and go out and do this. And a lot of times when you'd see the videos of us training like outdoors in alleys and stuff like that, it wasn't so much that we're like, let's go train out in an alley because it'll look cool. It was because the community center we were at the time would double book our room a lot of times, and we'd be like, oh fuck, okay, well, guess we're working out in the alley today. Lighting's better anyway, so it's fine. But when you put all that together with the music and the hoodies, and at the time I was riding a motorcycle, so I had a wallet chain, you know, it's like I could see people were like, oh, these guys are just acting like a bunch of thugs, and that really wasn't what I was trying to project at all. It was more just like, it's just who I was back then. But in retrospect, I can see why people, you know, why some people sort of were like, dude, this is a bit much. But to me, it's like, I was like, just why aren't you just looking at the content? Why aren't you looking at the actual blade work? Why does it have to be about my musical selection, or, you know, how I'm dressed or anything like that? And as I've gotten older and, you know, been in the spotlight a bit more and sort of I've learned that no, you know, how you present yourself in totality is going to shape how people see your material. So, you know, I don't think I'll ever be at a point where I will be seen as mainstream, or Libre will be seen as mainstream or socially palatable. But I do understand that, you know, you do have to contextualize what you're doing and make sure people understand that, no, we're not trying to breed a bunch of sociopaths and send them out into the world. We're trying to prepare people to survive sociopaths. And this is one of the things that when people, you know, say like, oh, you're teaching murder, my counter argument to that is it doesn't take any special skill to murder someone with a knife. If someone has it in their head they're going to murder another person and they have a knife in their hand, ever since the first caveman picked up a pointy rock, human beings have been doing that. It doesn't take training. It takes training to survive that sort of lethal intent and that sort of attack. And so that's what I'm preparing people for, is to overcome that level of aggression by being more efficient and more aggressive. You know, I really don't think there's a psychopath, you know, studying my videos and going out to his, you know, Babb dummy and going to his psychopath meetings and training my stuff so they can be more efficient killers. They don't need that. If they're going to kill someone, they're just going to kill someone. You know, my goal is to prepare someone to deal with that. And I don't think I was particularly good at articulating that early on, mostly because I just really didn't like speaking publicly at all. I was more of like, hey, just, you know, I'll let my techniques do the talking. I'll let my training do the talking. And I've come to learn that, like, no, it's my responsibility to sort of contextualize what we do and make sure people understand why we do things this way.
That's I think that, you know, that's sort of a lost part of martial arts is really contextualization. Is that a word? I think so. Contextualization of what you're doing and why you're doing it and when you're doing it, because you know, the people that say, well, you're teaching murder. Okay, martial arts is the manufacture of corpses and cripples, and the people that have forgotten that pretend that that's not what they're doing when they go do Tai Chi, that is what you're doing. You're doing it for your reasons, and you're, you know, doing it through the methodology you're doing. But the fact behind all martial arts is that they were created to fight, and defending your life in most of human history means having to kill the person attacking you, or at least disable them to a degree where not only can they not come back for you later today, they're not going to work right anymore. They can't come back for you later. And, you know, that's That's why I don't teach kids classes. People are like, oh, get some foam sticks, teach kids. I'm like, have you ever talked to me before? But you know, it's fine to go to karate, to go to Shotokan karate and become a black belt and break bricks and do tournaments and stuff like that. Fine. And to do it through that traditional mindset. I've been in some really beautiful dojos, but I've also been in some really grubby ass gyms where they're producing people that can hurt you. You know, whether it's Muay Thai or boxing or whatever, and you know, you don't have to come at it with a everything I'm learning is for killing mindset, but at the same time, like, you need to balance that out and understand what you're doing. And if you're learning a traditional karate style, okay, what was the context in which that was created? Where did it come
Exactly.
from? You know, I think you showed up at a time that was perfect for something like Libre to show up in America. And those early videos, you were putting things together for yourself, and you know, whether people didn't like the aesthetic or not, doesn't have anything to do with where it is now and where you fit into the current martial arts landscape.
And building on what you said, one of the things that I always try to get across to people is what I'm teaching isn't meant to be the solution to every self-defense situation. You know, if, you know, you're walking home and some drunk, you know, shoves you, the solution isn't to whip out your knife and take his eye.
I was gonna say, don't face that, Jim.
You know, what I teach isn't even meant to be the solution for the vast majority of self-defense situations. It's meant for, you know, home invasions, you know, sexual assaults, multiple armed attackers, someone trying to kill you with a knife, armed robberies, or in the context of military usage. You know, I don't advocate that, you know, a knife should be your go-to response to every or even most violent situations, but there is a time and a place for it, when lethal force is justified and when lethal force is going to be the only way that you can survive or that you can protect the people you care about. So it's I think of it as a very, very specialized skill set, not something that's meant to be the solution to everything. And I used to actually teach empty hand in conjunction with Libre. But what I ultimately decided on was there are hundreds, thousands of people who are phenomenal empty hand instructors. There aren't as many phenomenal or skilled knife instructors that really know how to contextualize knife work in a modern situation. There are plenty of them, but not nearly as many empty hand instructors as they are. So as someone who specializes in knife work, I felt that I would be more useful focusing on what I do very well and leave the empty hand stuff to people who do it better than I do it. But just because I don't teach empty hand anymore, that doesn't mean that that I don't think there's a place for it. You know, I think that you should go to an empty hand specialist and learn empty hand skills.
Yeah, I think I've seen a couple of videos of you boxing with Babb. You've got some hands.
These hands have arthritis now, so it's a little, the weather has to be right for me to really unleash with them. I'll put it that way. But no, I love boxing. You know, I'm not a big MMA guy. It's just not my jam, but I love boxing, and I always have. I love doing boxing. I love watching boxing. I love holding mitts for people. All of that. I miss teaching boxing a lot, and so when every now and then with my guys we'll do a little bit of stuff just for fun, just to mix it up. And I definitely think there is a place for empty hand work. I think that should be the bulk of people's self-defense training, but if they decide to get to the level where they want to learn lethal skills with a knife, that's when they should come to me. I don't think Libre is the kind of thing that's going to, it should be taught like in a shopping center next to the Taekwondo school with, tens of thousands of practitioners and, sort of a fast food kind of thing. I think it's something that people seeking specialized skill sets will seek out people who need it. And that's one of the things I try and get across to new chapters is I don't care if you have 2 students or 20 students. I'd rather you have 2 students who are doing it for the right reasons, who are passionate about it, who you trust to handle the material, than have 20 people who, really have no interest in it, have no need to know it, or just aren't mature enough to handle it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I intentionally keep my classes very small. I limit my class to about 10 students. So, people that we know, we have a good class chemistry. It's people I can trust to teach the material to, because I know they're not going to go be psychopaths and go hurt someone.
Oh yeah, for sure. You actually brought up multiple attackers multiple times. And that was one of the things that I wanted to bring up with you. There's a video that is out now of a Sikh gentleman in England. And what's interesting about Sikhs in England is they're one of the only people that are allowed to legally carry a knife in England. And, if you're familiar with the UK, knife crime is kind of a big deal over there because they don't have any guns. But the Sikh guy was attacked by 3 guys. I think maybe a couple of them had knives, maybe even 4 guys. A couple of them had knives, a couple of them had some sort of striking implement, and he killed like 3 of the 4 of them just with reverse grip. Reverse grip kind of downward thrusts. It looked like maybe he was landing, upper chest, aiming down. But it was extremely chaotic. It's tough to tell what's going on. He gets away. One guy remains on the ground. Another guy falls a minute or so later. But, those multiple attacker scenarios are one of the few times where I think it kind of is almost always within your rules of engagement to draw a knife. Do you guys train any of that in your classes? Like, do you train for multiple attackers? I didn't have enough people in my Libre group for us to really do that. I guess we could do 2-on-1.
Yes, extensively. And this is actually in traditional martial arts, the way I came up, usually multiple attackers is reserved for senior students, like brown belts or black belts. And I used to reserve it for senior students, but eventually I sort of came to the realization, like, why am I holding this back when this is like one of the most dangerous scenarios they need to be prepared for? So it's actually one of the things that I start discussing very early on with students, how to stack opponents, how to know which opponent to go at first, how to, position yourself so that if you do stack your opponents, the other guy gets around the one you're engaging to transition over to that opponent. All that stuff is stuff that now I try to cover very early on in someone's training, because, and the way the world is now, if you are in a situation where you would be legally justified using a knife, there's a pretty good chance that situation is going to involve multiple attackers. So it's something you need to be prepared for. And I don't see any compelling reason to wait to introduce that dynamic to a student.
That's interesting that you go so hard against the grain, because that is sort of, I did karate as a kid, and then I just fell into the world of sports until my 20s. Very, very, very mediocre athlete. And I'm probably being nice by saying I'm a mediocre athlete. But the concept of multiple attackers, yeah, I think I saw like my sensei as a kid do a couple of demos against 3 of his brown belts, and they came at him one at a time, and he kind of hit him with a couple of things, and then they kind of and then they backed up. It wasn't anything near the chaos of what you can see. And that particular video stands out because it's one where the good guy wins, because generally that's not how you see those things go down. You see a terrible attack where, we've witnessed it a lot in the last, couple of years with the protests and what happens when people wolf pack somebody. There's plenty of that shit available. You can go to Hood Site or USA Crime or whatever and watch those.
Just scroll down
to
your
heart's,
Instagram feed.
yeah, you can watch that stuff to your heart's content. But this particular one was interesting because the dude came at it with such ferocity. But I think the one part of it was you're dealing with a literal warrior culture that has continued. My right hand is deformed by a Sikh.
I can see the boxer's fracture from here.
Yeah, that was a stick.
Oh,
straight in the top of my hand. Yeah, AJ Singh, you motherfucker. I hope you're watching.
That's one of the
this.
things. That recessed knuckle is one of the things that I tell people to look for.
Oh yeah,
everyone knows about cauliflower ears, broken noses, but that boxer's fracture, that's telling too.
If you look at the hands, that's it. Well, exactly. The cauliflower ear is a big giveaway. A big dude with a mushed nose.
Scar tissue around the eyes. But the boxer's fracture is the one that gets missed a lot.
Yeah. So people don't look at the hands. I don't know what it is. I'm not sure. But so the other half on that Indian guy was the reverse grip. He came at it with a reverse grip, and he wasn't doing anything particularly sophisticated because he had 4 guys trying to kill him. So he was just going ham, and it really worked out well. But you give you some responsibility for the reverse grip edge in thing that we're seeing a lot now as a kind of a knife making trend. There's a lot of reverse grip edge in knives coming out now, but can you kind of explain where? I mean, it was obvious from the video that he was throwing descending ice pick attacks, but the kirpan I think is sort of curved inward a little, so it was almost as if he was throwing reverse grip edge in, whether he was or not. Can you kind of like sort of give us background on how you came to it?
Yeah. So early on, how we would pressure test thing is, I'm not a big fan of having people do knife sparring on an open floor where there's a lot of space, because that doesn't replicate how the intensity of actual knife violence. So we do it with what we call blender sessions. We do a little bit of open floor sparring, but I like to lock people in a confined space, like maybe a 5-foot by 6-foot storage closet. That's what we initially used, and make them spar in there. And we do it for a few reasons. One is it forces you to be aggressive, because if you're in tight quarters like that and you're trying to be passive, you're just going to quickly be overwhelmed. And it also replicates the actual dynamics of a knife assault, where it will be happening in a close quarters environment. And when we started, and that was really how we would pressure test concepts. We would drill it till my guys got proficient in it. Then we go into the blender session, and if they couldn't let it come out organically in a blender session, we wouldn't use it. It wasn't just a matter of being able to pull it off, because it's one, if you go in there hunting to pull off a technique, that's one thing, but you're not going to be hunting to pull off a technique in a street altercation. You're not going to be like, oh, I'm going to do disarm number 5 on this guy because that one's my favorite. It's about, if you train something and develop the muscle memory, will it come out by itself under duress? So it becomes a very intense sparring session, and we usually only go on for 20 seconds or so when we do these, because you tend to get pretty beat up. And early on, what I found was, if one guy went in a point down grip and the other guy was in a hammer grip, when he was in a point down grip, it kept his arms elevated because the strikes were coming in on a high line, which created barriers between the opponent and his vitals. It also kept the fight in the opponent's face. Whereas if you're in hammer grip, you're more apt to come in with low or outside strikes, which aren't going to produce the same kind of reaction that throwing a knife into someone's face or neck is going to throw. So when you have your arms elevated, you're helping to protect yourself. You're keeping the fight in the opponent's face, but you're also hitting the targets I like to hit: the eyes, the throat, the arterial system in the upper chest. And so I found that in those close quarters situations, the person in a point down grip was usually the one who ended up dominating and coming out on top, just because the other person was freaking out about the knife coming at their face. I used to gravitate more towards a more traditional style ice pick grip, but what I found was, when you do the Pikal grip, or what we call scythe grip in Libre, you have this very advantageous dynamic where if I hit my target, obviously I'm doing damage. But if the opponent blocks or flails and their arm gets in the way, when I cycle back, I'm going to fillet the arm and bite into the thumb. So even if my attack gets blocked, I'm still doing damage. And when I train military, if I only have, a 4 or 5 hour seminar, I'll tell them, if you forget everything else that we covered today, just remember, stab and rip, stab and rip, stab and rip. Because your opponent is only going to have 2 arms. So if they're fighting and their arm comes up, you peel their arm out of the way, you damage it. After a while, they're going to stop putting that arm up, and you're just going to tear through the defense and get to the vitals. And it's sort of just a gross motor skill that you can impart in someone very quickly. And I really like the concept of, even if it's blocked, you're still doing damage. And so that's really where I started to gravitate towards the scythe grip is. And the other reason that I prefer a scythe grip over a traditional ice pick grip is, people think in an ice pick grip you can both slash and stab, but the slash is actually they don't land very often in my experience. Because I would film the blender sessions, we actually had a ladder, and I would climb up on this ladder and film down to watch the sessions, so I could go back and watch them and actually see the dynamics unfolding. And I found that with the slashes, they usually miss, just because of the way the blade's angled, you're not getting quite, the reach. The stabs hit, the slashes don't. So since the slashes are lower percentage techniques, I didn't really see the advantage of being able to slash in that position, but the ripping lands a lot and it does tremendous amounts of damage. If you've done one of the organic medium sessions with Ed, where they bring out the dead pig, you've seen how much damage you can do with a stab and ripping motion.
Oh yeah.
When we first started doing those down in the black box sessions in Mexico, even I was stunned at how, like the spine rip that we do, how much damage you can do with just a stab and a rip. It's catastrophic. It's fight ending. So I started to find that, the side grip or Pakal grip offered far more advantages than a standard ice pick grip. And, the mechanical advantages of, being able to keep the fight in the opponent's face and sort of organically protect your own vitals in the process, really just coalesced into like a favored grip. But that being said, I think it's important that if you're going to study knife work, you need to be comfortable using it in any grip it ends up in your hand. Because you might be grabbing a weapon of opportunity, you might foul your draw, you might lose your knife in altercation, have to pick it up. You might not get to choose the grip that you're fighting in. So I think that, it's good to have a go-to grip that you're comfortable with, but it's equally important to be able to use it, in a hammer grip or in a reverse hammer grip, any way it ends up in your hand.
Yeah, that was one thing that I really liked when I, started to get into Libre, was that you had material for the hammer grip edge in ripcord grip, right? As you call it. The Grismal technique. I was like, oh, look at that. That's one of those things that, intended or not, you had this massive ripple effect that has gone across the knife making world, because I've seen knives now that literally, it looks like, oh, you design your knife like this, and then you just turn the damn blade around and put a notch for the finger. Like, okay, you guys took that and ran with it. I like it. Which,
it's interesting to me that it's interesting to me to see that there are trends and fads, even in something as, strange as knife combatives or knife making. It's like back when we came on the scene, there was a lot of large knife work, a lot of karambit work, and now you don't see a lot of either of those at all. It's all smaller knives, a lot of reverse edging knives, Pakal style knives being made. And it's like, obviously we aren't exclusively the ones who took things in that direction, but we were a big part of that movement. And it's kind of just interesting to see, like, oh, there are fads and trends and everything, even something like this.
Oh yeah, including fucking paring knives.
Those
the Pioneer Woman one, really, I was like, okay, I guess we're going there. And one of the things that people don't necessarily know, like, even kind of like knife nerds or whatever is hey, a kitchen knife should do better against bone, because a kitchen knife is going to be encountering it all the time. It should, like, that should be how it goes. But yeah, I wonder if Ree has any idea. She must know by now. The actual pioneer woman, like, she must know
I'm
by
sure she
now what's
does.
going on. Yeah,
Like,
whether she
I just
appreciates it or not.
I just imagine her assistant came in one day and was like, okay, you've got this meeting, you've got this going this on, and you were mentioned in this article. And she's like, okay, sounds like a manageable day. And then anything else? Well, yeah, there's one thing that's kind of odd. That knife you made, the kitchen knife, that's sold out everywhere. Really? Why? How do I even explain this? So there's this
guy
guy
made
on
aggressive
social media.
carnitas.
Yeah, and and then like when everyone started tagging her in it, like she must have just been like, oh my god, just discontinue this knife. I don't want to be associated with it. Yeah, it's the paring knife was a bizarre trend. But the thing is, like, again, that was something that started. Ed introduced that in Mexico because people couldn't afford good quality knives, and he found this cheap little paring knife that law enforcement or someone could carry, and also that it was something that you had a narrative that you could deny. You could carry an apple and be like, this was for my lunch. But it kind of lost its it lost the advantage of having plausible deniability, because people started making tactical fruit knives and putting wraps on them and making sheaths for them and putting them in their pocket dumps. And now it's like, if someone ever did have to use a paring knife in a self-defense situation, and the DA, decided to Google paring knife,
you're gonna you're gonna have a bad time. I've got a $50 sheath for one over there somewhere.
Oh, I do too.
I don't carry it because, like, that doesn't, like you're saying, it kind of defeats the purpose if you get caught with it. Like, this?
And so there was a time when it was actually if you were traveling, for instance, and you didn't, you weren't checking a bag, you could just land wherever you were going, go pick up a paring knife, and you could have a knife on you, and then just ditch it before you come home because it was only $12. And you could have a narrative behind it for why you have it. I'm just carrying this for my lunch or whatever the situation might be. But now, if you ever used it and they did the tiniest bit of research on that knife, and then this is another thing that I try and encourage people, like with the pocket dump pictures and stuff like that. Like, yeah, it's cool. I enjoy looking at them. But keep in mind, if you ever have to use any of that gear, the DA is going to see that, for the last 5 years, you've been posting daily pictures of all the knives and guns and shit that you carry on you, and that you follow pages and like pictures of that stuff. And it's like, for people in our culture, who study blade combatives or martial arts, it doesn't seem that odd. It's just part of how we live. We carry a pocket knife, we go around, and the pocket dump pics aren't in any way off-putting to us. It's interesting to see what other people are carrying and see the cool gear and stuff like that. But when you think about how a jury's going to react to seeing say 60 pictures of that, after you had to use a blade in a self-defense situation, it's not going to look good to the jury. It's going to look like you are a psychopath who is out looking for problems, even though that you're just kind of see yourself as a gear collector who also trained in this stuff, and that you're not a psychopath. It's not about what it's about what the retiree and the housewife and the guy who is looking for a week off from work at the factory. It's how do they see it? And people who aren't in this culture day to day, it looks really fucking weird. And that's also why I tell people, don't carry a knife that looks like it was designed by a fucking Klingon. Because think about what that's going to look like when it's covered in blood in an evidence bag. It's going to look like you were a psychopath who was out looking for an excuse to put a knife into someone. And I really do encourage people, if you choose to carry a knife, when you do, try not to think of it in your mind as a weapon. Think of it primarily as a tool that you carry that you can use as a weapon if your life's ever in danger. Don't whip your knife out and show it to all your friends, and don't carry a different knife every day and sort of show it to all your coworkers, because you don't want to be in a situation where when, after a self-defense situation, when they come talk to your coworkers and say, what can you tell me about, John over there? Oh, the crazy knife guy?
Yeah, loves knives, loves
Yeah,
them.
you don't want
Constantly
to
got
be
one in
that
his
guy.
hand. Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
and then also part of it to me is just a legitimate, like, I don't think it's not how I want to live my life. I don't want to live
Mhm,
my life spending every second thinking about someone trying to murder me.
mhm,
It's like I'm comfortable enough in my skill set that I know that if I am ever in a situation like that, I'm probably going to fare pretty well.
mhm,
If I have a pocket knife on me, I feel pretty confident I can survive most situations.
mhm.
And that allows me to go out and enjoy my life because I don't have to worry so much about this stuff. I don't have to think about, like, what if, there's a terrorist attack at the supermarket or, anything like that,
Right.
And I find that a lot of people tend to get caught up in the mentality of being ready for some kind of catastrophic assault becomes
Mm,
their way of life. And to me, that's sort of a depressing way to live. I don't think it's an especially mentally healthy way to live. I think being able to handle a situation like that is an important skill set to have, but I don't think it's a good thing when that becomes your identity.
yeah. Well, I think a lot of those guys also have a like a complex of being unproven to themselves. You know what I mean? Like someone, you've been in the martial arts your whole life, and you've done the things that you've done, and it doesn't seem to me like you feel like you need to prove anything to yourself or anyone else at this point. You're out there living your life, sharing your art your way. But there's a lot of guys out there, they don't know. They
Yeah.
don't know. They don't have that comfort in, like, well, I've got a blade on me if it fucking goes down or whatever. Like, I'm pretty confident with my hands and feet, or, I grapple pretty good. They don't have that. They have that, is this the time I'm going to use it? And, some of that in martial arts is coming from not pressure testing and not
Yeah,
sparring and
I
not
was just
getting
about to
hit,
say. I was
you
just about to
know?
say that's a symptom of lack of intense pressure testing.
Yeah.
And when it comes to pressure testing, I don't think that you should take a new student and throw them in a confined space with someone who's acting like a maniac and let them get the shit beat out of them. It's something you incrementally build up to. But
I've only
you need
seen that happen one time where the guy came back. I saw
Yeah.
one time at a gathering where one of our just nastiest bastard fighters took the head off of this guy in his very first fight. Dude was bleeding, like, from his ears. He was all messed up, left, and we're like, never gonna see that guy again. And he came back. Never see him another time.
Yeah, well, I mean, that shows something about his character. And that,
Masochism.
well, I was going to say a mental toughness, but that it could be that too. But yeah, I think that's why it's important to pressure test things to the point that the students are going to fail sometimes.
Mhm.
And then when they do fail, say, all right, go back, reset, let's do it again, let's figure out where it went wrong, and make them do it over and over again, keeping them honest, but building them until they can get through that situation.
Mhm.
You're never going to know no until you're in a real situation, but you can become confident in your skills to the point that you're not afraid of that situation anymore.
Mhm.
Or that you don't feel like you have to be out there ready to prove yourself at all times. But yeah, that's why you never see me posting pocket dump pictures. Is one, I don't think from a legal standpoint it puts you in a particularly good position if you ever do have to defend yourself. But I also just don't want to be the kind of guy who's obsessing over, like, do I have all the stuff I carry? Do I have a tourniquet on me? Do I have this? Do I have that? And
Mhm.
every time I go out to grab a cup of coffee in the morning, I'm like, who's there? Who's there? What's this? What's going on? Ready for the attack to come.
Right.
It's just a horrible way to go through life. I don't know why anyone would want to do it. I want to train so that I don't have to be worried about what's going to happen to
Right.
me.
Mhm. That's the context of, the modern world that we live in, is you've got these guys out there that, unproven on whatever level, and they are, is someone going to attack me today? Like, I talk I talk shit to people. I do go out there in the world and occasionally rub people the wrong way. And I'm never worried about somebody just attacking me. What are you, Mr. Accountant, or whatever, worried about the ninja assassins coming in for you? You should be much more worried, as we've kind of talked about your situational awareness. Yeah, okay, but once you've got that dialed in, you don't need to be in like condition orange all the time.
Yeah.
You can drop into yellow.
And it always kind of amuses me, the things that people do worry about. Like people, before I taught full time, I was a locksmith, and people would always want to put in, more deadbolts, better locks, stuff like that. And sometimes I would just occasionally ask them, do you have a fire extinguisher? No, I don't. Yeah, I should probably pick one up. It's because, part of our culture is people worry about like home invasions and stuff like
Right.
that, but they don't really worry about a house fire. But statistically, You're probably, a kitchen fire is probably a lot more likely than, some crackhead kicking down your door and,
Right.
kidnapping you.
Right.
But people tend to fixate on the, for lack of a better word, the sexier forms of ways that life can go wrong, and not,
Right.
Things like, are you wearing your fucking seatbelt? Do you have a fire extinguisher in your house? It's no, I want to be prepared in case, there's a terrorist attack in,
Iowa,
Idaho or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, it's just a weird sort of human mentality. And, it's like, I think that, I think that it is important to be able to handle yourself and to protect yourself and protect the people you care about. I think people should be proficient fighters. I'm a bit old school in that I especially feel that males should be proficient at protecting themselves and protecting people they care about. But I don't think that should become their sole purpose in life, unless they are a soldier or someone who makes a living doing that.
Right.
I think the people in your life would appreciate you more if you weren't constantly, thinking about that kind of stuff. So I think it's important to keep this stuff in its context, but also to become very, very proficient at it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's absolutely. Even I was saying, I don't personally teach kids, and I don't think it's the greatest thing to teach kids about weapons. But I think all kids should be doing, some wrestling, taekwondo, something, to get their minds in there. And as they get older, I think boxing and Muay Thai, maybe not. That there's a little bit of a different thing, but boxing should maybe come in as a teen. You're getting hit in the head and stuff like that. And although there's also something to be said about little kids not quite being strong enough to really hurt each other.
Yeah.
And learning, you get Floyd Mayweather by having him start when he's just big enough to do this with his hands. So, I mean, that sort of thing, I think, should be personal to the parent, to the family. But we've just got, a couple of generations worth of people in line now that have had kids it's not how they're operating. Hey, which brings us to your book. So why don't you just kind of give people a little bit of a yeah, you did. It's a literary love note to an entire generation. Do you want to kind of give people a little bit of a rundown on Rough Edges, so that I know you just burned through that whole first printing, huh?
Yeah.
Those things were all gone before they were even really up for sale.
Yeah, the first printing went really quickly. So I was actually inspired by one of Anthony Bourdain's lesser known books called Medium Raw, where it was more of a collection of essays about the culinary world and about his life that weren't necessarily interconnected in any sort of way. So it kind of gave him the opportunity to explore a lot of different topics without the burden of having to put it into an overarching narrative. And that was sort of what inspired this book. And that I had a lot of things that I wanted to put into print that, wouldn't necessarily coalesce into an overarching theme, so to speak. So I was able to break it down into 3 sections. I have a section that's just about culture, about modern culture, things that drive me nuts and shit like that. And a lot of that was just venting. And then there's a section about martial arts where I discuss traditional martial arts and combatives, and Bruce Lee, and there's some stories, about there's some stories from my younger years about when I was part of the traditional world that probably don't paint it in the best light. And then there's a section about mentors, and the importance of mentors and how they can affect us even into middle age. And that's something that now that I'm in my mid 40s, I've started to think back and realize, things that I experienced when I was 8, 9, 10 years old have really stuck with me all these years. I have instructor who was a dick when I was 13, and I'm still pissed at him about it, which is ridiculous.
I read all about it.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, I don't know, with this one, I kind of just felt free to more speak my mind on stuff like that. Cause I told the stories about some of these instructors before and finding Libre, but I was a little more delicate about it. And in this, I just kind of said what I was really thinking about it.
Yeah, this was fairly unflinching. It's comparing it to something Bourdain wrote is definitely up there. As somebody who's read a couple of your books and quite a bit of what he's written, I see the inspiration.
Yeah, it's like Anthony Bourdain was the one who sort of introduced the world to what like high-end culinary kitchens were really like with
Don't
with
order
his
fish
first
on
book.
Tuesday.
Yeah, exactly. Stuff like that. And just also talking about like what degenerates these guys actually are. And that book was obviously Kitchen Confidential. And a fun fact, the original working title for Finding Libre was going to be Dojo Confidential.
Oh.
Like the original file still is named Dojo Confidential, but that just sort of morphed into more of an autobiography as I was writing it. But people weren't really aware that there was all this yelling and screaming and all this Ramsey type stuff that went on in kitchens till he wrote about it. And that,
right.
A lot of these cooks, are like just drug addicts and degenerates and all the horrible shit that happens. And when I started writing Finding Libre, I just read Kitchen Confidential, and I was thinking, someone should write a book like this about martial arts, because martial art, and for those who haven't read the book yet, I discuss like a lot of things like the egos in martial arts and the fact that there's a lot of pedophiles teaching in martial arts, and just a lot of the stuff that doesn't really get discussed a lot. So when I read Kitchen Confidential, I was like, someone should write a book about martial arts like this. Like, someone should write a book about martial arts that covers this kind of stuff. I should write that book.
Yeah, I'm someone.
Yeah, and so I started writing Finding Libre with that intention, but it morphed into something different. And the middle section of this book kind of it revisits what my original intent was, and sort of exposing, like, this is what goes on behind the scenes in martial arts that people, that students don't really get to see. I don't know. I kind of feel like I'm in a place now where I can speak about this honestly and piss people off and sort of not care anymore. And that being said, I didn't write it with the intention of pissing anyone off, but I'm sure will be people who hear about what's in it and, get pissy about it, but
yeah, fuck those guys anyway.
Yeah.
That's not, the tone speaks very much to, I feel like the kind of people that gravitate towards Libre Fighting, and even people that maybe might not already be in the, in the circle of Libre Fighting. If they were to read this book, they might go, this guy teaches knife karate, huh? And, and check it out. I really feel that you've created an American martial art, and there aren't too many of those. And in that, I don't mean like, at this point, no gi jujitsu, Eddie Bravo created 10th Planet. Well, yeah, I guess contextually it is an American martial art, but it's taken very, very heavily from, the Gracies grappled without gis on. So, and the certain aspects like, I think it's, Jean-Jacques Machado doesn't have a whole hand, so he wasn't able to use the grips and things like that. So there's lines there, but you've taken the actual context of American life, the way that original jiu-jitsu took the concept of, I'm a samurai who's lost my sword on the battlefield, and now I have to rolling arm bar and break this guy's arm. You're looking at it through a lens of the person living in the time that the martial art is being created. And who knows, down the line, when we're in space, you know, on a space station, when some guy is going to use his titanium vibrating knife to pop some dude's, you know, helmet. Who the fuck knows? And that might be Libre Fighting later on.
Yeah, and I think also not just gearing a martial art towards the way violence unfolds in the Western world, but philosophically it has a very Western mindset in that it favors functionality over tradition. It favors you know, it's very brash and assertive, a very sort of American sort of mindset. You know, if you travel in Europe, they tend to think of Americans as being very loud and brash and a little bit rough and unrefined. And
I have no idea why.
Yeah, and that sort of, you know, that sort of mindset really influences the tactics in Libre, and that it's not it's not about working around an opponent coming at you or blending with their energy and relocating it. It's about imposing your and directing your energy into an opponent to overcome an obstacle, which I think is a very sort of Western mindset to approaching problems.
Absolutely.
And so it's not just that it was, you know, geared towards, you know, the way violence unfolds in the Western world. It was about applying a Western mindset to it, which I think makes it more approachable to people who have grown up with that sort of mindset, you know, who just have that ingrained in them. But yeah, it was never my intention to create a new system or new martial art. It was just more about exploring things, and it just sort of took off in this direction.
Well, I think that's the way that the best things come about. You know what I mean? It comes from a need that was arising at the time where, you know, those guys in Mexico, you saved some lives, most likely, you know what I mean? And continue to, by the tradition being passed on. Same thing with the Indonesian and Filipino guys, same thing with any American service members who, you know, have picked up these skills from you. You know, it's organic, but you showed up in a time where there was a space for this, and it's clear from anyone looking at it objectively that was your space, and it was waiting for Libre to show up and fill in, which I think it's really cool, man. It's an interesting topic from, you know, I'm not a military law enforcement member. I mean, I train martial arts for fun and because I really like to hit people, and this is the only way I can do it and not get in shitloads of trouble. But you know, I consider myself Libre adjacent. I'm not necessarily like, that's not my major art. But watching the evolutions going from, you know, I happened to kind of contact you around the time when you were phasing from that distance learning program into the kind of newer guild system. So getting to watch the evolution of starting with those old tapes and seeing kind of where you've gone from there has been extremely cool. So anyway, man, I really appreciate you coming on today. Anybody listening, go out and buy all the copies of Scott's next printing of Rough Edges. There you go. A literary love note.
A literary fuck you.
Oh, my bad. I must have missed that part. Yeah, read it. You'll see.
I'll be honest. I loved that title so much. It was part of the motivation for writing it. Like once I had that title kind of in my mind, I was like, okay, that sets the tone for the rest of the book.
Hell yeah. No, it does. It does. It's clear from top to bottom on that one. But you've also written, you know, almost a half dozen other books, right? You've got
we've got Finding Libre, which is an autobiography, Tao of the Reaper.
Yep.
Two of the books that were in the study packages, Endemic Knife Fighting, Machiavellian Knife Fighting.
Yep.
Then a book on leadership, The Prince and the Disciple.
The Prince and the Disciple, that's right.
Yeah. And then there's one that's finished, but I'm holding off on putting it out right now. It's a novelization of my career as a locksmith.
Cool.
Yeah,
oh, that's really cool. All right. Yeah. So you've got more dimensions.
Yeah. You know, I made that one a novelization specifically because I wanted to didn't want to get sued.
That's fair.
It's very much a novelization in the sense that Bukowski's novels were novelizations, where it was a thinly veiled
autobiography.
With just some names and locations changed and stuff like that. But everything in that book is at least 90% true, probably 95% true. There's a couple little tweaks here and there. And that one's actually done. I'll probably put it out sometime next year. It just felt like a bit too much of a departure to go from the stuff I have written to something that's just like a complete 180, because it's very much a comical take on it. And I tried to inject some comedy and levity into this one as well, but
sure. Oh, there's some dark chuckles.
Some
dark chuckles.
So, I thought it would be better to release this one first as sort of a bridge into that one, but that one will be out sometime next year probably.
Cool. That's awesome. Well, tell people where to find you, man. If
LibreFighting.com or Instagram is where we're most active. We do have Facebook pages. We do have a Facebook page. There's multiple Libre pages on every social media platform. I'm very inactive on Facebook now. Little bit more active on YouTube, but not too much. I really try and focus all of our energy on Instagram. And so that's where, I'm posting several times a week, almost daily now.
Cool. Yeah, you offer some of the most content of any martial artist that, I've ever seen. And I've had people tell me I need to, do more like free tutorials on YouTube. And I'm like, go fuck yourself. Like, I'm not doing that. And then I tell people, like, you want to see some like free shit? Go check out Scott, because you are so like generous with your material. And if you don't know what the hell you're doing, it doesn't matter. You can go out there and stab up a Babb. Yeah. So like, and try and replicate your speed, your accuracy. Like, if they don't know what the targeting is, if they don't understand what, this is versus this versus, each of those things, they're not really learning much, but you're giving people such an introduction, to things that it's really incredible to me. And I know that there's people out there that really appreciate it, for sure.
I'm glad. I enjoy doing it, and I really enjoy trying to drive the conversation forward in terms of knife combatives, even if people don't agree with what I'm doing. From any point of view, I like putting it out there so it can at least be discussed, and so that the knife combatives industry doesn't stagnate, because it kind of feels like left unchecked, it will, and it has in the past. So
absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Scott. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, man. I was just gonna say thank you.
Oh yeah, definitely. Those of you guys looking for some knife combatives, especially if you're in the Filipino martial arts world already and you're mostly, practicing with a 6-inch or bigger blade, go find the stabby guy in the beanie. He will lead you to where you need to go. All right, guys. Thank you, everybody who's checked out my show so far on this little first season. The next couple of months, I'm going to be moving back east and getting all these online on an audio format. And then hopefully in December, I've already got a couple of people lined up. We'll start season 2. Thank you all for tuning in. Foxhound out.